Modern cities wrap themselves in glass, as if transparency itself were protection. Vast, flawless surfaces promise light, openness and mastery over the outside world. From a distance, these buildings look calm and controlled, but the illusion is fragile. The moment reality presses back, a violent storm, a brutal heat wave, a sudden pressure shift, the surface meant to protect becomes the first thing to fail. Glass fractures without warning, panels shatter, interiors are exposed. Buildings designed to feel safe turn hostile in seconds. We accept this outcome almost casually because we have been trained to believe failure is normal, as long as it can be replaced quickly. 800 years ago, that assumption did not exist. In the medieval world, a window was never an upgrade. It was a calculated risk carved into a wall whose primary purpose was survival. Every opening weakened protection. It invited cold that could kill in winter, wind that stripped heat from bodies, rain that spoiled stores, fire that spread inward, and intrusion that could not be undone. Medieval builders did not need simulations to understand this. They lived with it, and because they lived with it, they built accordingly. They did not trust materials to behave perfectly. Perfection was never expected. Instead, they trusted mass, depth, and restraint. Stone walls were thick because thickness slowed the world down. Windows were narrow, deeply recessed, angled and protected, so that weather and force could not strike them directly. The glass inside these openings was not there to impress. It existed to admit light, nothing more. These windows were designed with the assumption that no one might come to repair them for decades. Storms would pass, winters would return, time would grind on. Failure was unacceptable because replacement was never guaranteed. If this kind of forgotten knowledge matters to you, make sure you're subscribed. We dig up what modern systems buried. This difference reveals a deeper split in mindset. Medieval design assumed the world was hostile and unpredictable. Modern glass architecture assumes stable climates, constant energy, and uninterrupted maintenance. One planned for survival under neglect, the other planned for convenience under control. And that single difference explains why medieval windows still cling to stone walls today, scarred but intact, while modern glass often survives only until the next extreme event. But to understand why those old windows endured at all, we must confront a modern misconception. Because medieval glass was never primitive, it was intentional. Modern eyes are trained to distrust anything uneven. We associate strength with precision, reliability with flawless surfaces, and quality with materials that look identical from every angle. So when medieval glass is examined today, it is often dismissed as weak. The surface ripples, light bends unpredictably, tiny bubbles sit frozen inside the pane. To a modern observer, it looks like a mistake, but that reaction reveals more about modern assumptions than medieval skill, because what appears imperfect was, in reality, one of the reasons these windows survived. Medieval glass was shaped by breath and heat, not machines. It was blown, spun, cut, and cooled in ways that guaranteed variation. Thickness changed across a single pane, edges were irregular, no two pieces behaved exactly the same, and that inconsistency mattered. Perfectly flat modern glass allows stress to move cleanly through it. Heat expands the surface evenly, cold contracts it evenly, vibrations travel without resistance. When pressure reaches a critical point, failure is sudden and total. One crack becomes a cascade, and the entire surface gives way at once. Medieval glass disrupted that process. Uneven thickness scattered energy instead of concentrating it. Micro imperfections broke up crack paths, forcing fractures to slow, bend, or stop entirely. Stress could not race across the surface unchecked. When damage occurred, it stayed local. A single pane might fail, but the window endured. Medieval glassmakers did not describe this behavior with equations, but they understood it through experience. Glass that survived winter after winter mattered far more than glass that looked perfect on the day it was installed. This logic extended to scale. Medieval windows were divided into many small panes, held together with flexible lead cames. This was not decoration, it was containment. Small units assume breakage will happen and ensure it does not become catastrophic. Repair meant replacing one piece, not dismantling an entire opening. A local craftsman could fix it. Materials could be reused. The system did not depend on distant factories or precise chemical treatments. It depended on hands, tools, and patience. Modern glass rejects every one of these principles. It is engineered to be wide, thin, and uninterrupted. Chemical strengthening adds surface toughness, but it also stores energy. When failure comes, that energy is released instantly. Shattering is not an accident, it is the design. Medieval glass did not sacrifice itself dramatically. It endured quietly, aging slowly, absorbing stress without collapsing under it. And yet, even the most resilient glass would fail if it were left exposed. Medieval builders understood that too. The true protection of these windows did not stop at the pane. It began with what surrounded it. The real secret was never just the glass itself. Modern buildings ask glass to do everything. It is expected to stop wind, resist heat, hold pressure, block noise, and still remain perfectly transparent. When it fails, we blame the material. Medieval builders never made that mistake. They understood that glass was fragile by nature, and because of that, they refused to leave it exposed. The real protection of a medieval window was never the pane itself, it was the stone surrounding it. Medieval windows were not placed on the skin of a building, they were buried deep inside walls that were sometimes more than a meter thick. Stone carried the burden of the outside world. Wind struck the masonry first, not the glass. Flying debris hit depth and mass before reaching the opening. Temperature changes were slowed as they moved inward, passing through layers of material that absorbed and softened the shock. By the time air or heat reached the pane, its force had already been weakened. This mattered most when it came to thermal stress, the quiet killer of modern glass. Sudden sunlight heating one side of a pane while the other remains cold creates internal tension that modern windows struggle to survive. Medieval stone walls prevented that shock. Sunlight reached the glass indirectly, night cold arrived slowly. Expansion and contraction happened gradually, giving the material time to respond instead of fracture. Stone acted as a buffer, turning violent environmental swings into manageable changes. Modern architecture removes this protection entirely. Glass is pulled outward, flattened, widened, and made structural. We call this efficiency. Medieval builders would have called it dangerous. They understood that materials have limits, and forcing a weak material to behave like a strong one guarantees failure. Stone existed to take punishment. Glass existed only to admit light. Their roles were never confused. This layered thinking extended beyond weather. Narrow, recessed windows limited access during unrest. Angled openings reduced the effectiveness of projectiles. Depth created shadows that concealed interior movement while still allowing visibility outward. Windows were treated as controlled weaknesses, carefully managed rather than celebrated. That mindset runs through every medieval survival system worth studying. Builders assumed that conditions would worsen, not improve. They designed for the worst day, not the best one. Modern buildings are often designed for ideal conditions and then retrofitted with technology to survive reality. But protection alone was not the entire story. Medieval builders also understood that light itself was a force that needed control, and how they handled it reveals another uncomfortable contrast. The next lesson hides not in stone, but in shadow. The modern world treats light as virtue. More glass means more daylight, more openness, more status. Buildings compete to dissolve their walls entirely, as if exposure itself were progress. But light is not gentle. It carries heat, glare, and instability. And when it is allowed to flood unchecked, it turns shelter into a liability. Medieval builders understood this instinctively. They did not worship light, they controlled it. In the medieval world, light was a resource to be rationed, not celebrated. Every window represented a trade-off between visibility and survival. Small openings admitted just enough daylight to function, while protecting the interior from temperature extremes. Thick walls and deep recesses filtered sunlight before it reached the room, softening brightness and preventing sudden heat buildup. Interiors remained dim, but they were stable, and stability mattered more than aesthetics. This restraint had direct survival consequences. In winter, small windows reduced heat loss when fuel was scarce, and firewood meant life itself. In summer, limited exposure prevented interiors from overheating. Medieval buildings did not rely on machines to correct environmental mistakes. They avoided those mistakes in the first place. Comfort came from balance, not excess. Modern glass architecture reverses this logic entirely. Large exposed panes invite intense solar gain during the day and rapid heat loss at night. Buildings swing between extremes, and machines are forced to compensate constantly. When those systems fail, the structure becomes uninhabitable within hours. Medieval interiors, by contrast, remained usable even during harsh conditions. They did not fight the environment, they moderated it. This was not ignorance of light's benefits, it was understanding its cost. Medieval builders knew that uncontrolled light brought heat, and heat brought instability. They chose shadow deliberately, not because they lacked glass, but because they respected physics. Their windows worked with the building as a system, not against it. That same philosophy shaped how these windows aged. Reduced exposure slowed material fatigue. Glass weathered gradually, instead of violently. Stone absorbed stress instead of reflecting it inward. Nothing was pushed to its limit, because limits were acknowledged. Modern design treats discomfort as a temporary flaw that technology will fix. And that difference explains why one approach aged gracefully, while the other depends on constant correction. But even controlled light could not prevent damage forever. Medieval builders knew windows would break. The real genius lay in how they planned for that inevitability. The next layer of intelligence appears when things go wrong. Medieval builders did not believe in invincible systems. They believed in systems that could be hurt without collapsing. Windows, more than almost any other element, were expected to suffer damage. Storms shattered panes. Conflicts sent debris and projectiles through openings. Accidents happened during daily life. None of this was exceptional. Because damage was inevitable, medieval design focused on controlling it. This is why medieval windows were divided into many small panes, bound together with soft, flexible lead. Lead was not chosen for beauty. It was chosen because it could move when stone shifted, when glass expanded in heat or contracted in cold. The lead absorbed that movement. Stress did not concentrate at a single rigid point. It dispersed across the system. When a pane cracked, the failure stayed contained. One piece broke. The window survived. Repair was not an emergency operation. It was part of the design logic. A broken pane could be removed and replaced without dismantling the entire opening. Local craftsmen could do the work. Old glass could be reused. Materials did not need to be perfectly matched or chemically identical. The system tolerated variation. It assumed scarcity. It assumed that supply chains would fail, skilled labor might disappear, and ideal materials would not always be available. Modern windows assume the opposite. They are sealed units, engineered to perform perfectly until the moment they don't. Once seals fail or glass cracks, the entire unit is compromised. Repair is rarely possible. Replacement is the only option. That replacement depends on factories, transport, specialized tools, and exact specifications. The window is no longer a component. It is a product. This difference turns small damage into systemic failure. A medieval window could lose pieces and still function. A modern window, once compromised, often cannot be patched, adapted, or stabilized. The entire opening becomes a weak point. And when replacement is delayed, exposure grows rapidly. Medieval builders understood something modern design often ignores. Resilience is not the absence of damage. It is the ability to absorb damage without losing function. Their windows embodied that philosophy. They accepted imperfection, planned for breakage, and prevented local failures from becoming disasters. But even controlled damage accumulates over time, and how a system responds to time itself reveals whether it was built to endure or merely to perform when new. The final test was never the storm, it was aging. Modern materials are built to resist time, but only for a while. Coatings promise protection, treatments delay decay, seals are engineered to hold perfection in place. Yet once deterioration begins, it accelerates quickly and without mercy. Stress accumulates invisibly. Weakness hides behind smooth surfaces. Then failure arrives all at once. Medieval builders approached time differently. They did not fight it, they slowed it. Medieval windows were never expected to look the same after decades. Glass weathered, its surface softened, colour shifted as minerals reacted to sunlight and air. Lead cames flexed and crept under their own weight. Stone settled and adjusted. None of this was considered failure, it was anticipated behaviour, because nothing in the system was rigid. Nothing snapped suddenly. Movement was distributed. Stress became visible, predictable, and manageable. Modern glass conceals its stress. Internal tension builds behind flawless surfaces, stored by chemical strengthening and rigid framing. The window looks perfect right up until the moment it explodes into fragments. There is no warning phase, no gradual decline. Performance is binary, intact or destroyed. Medieval windows existed in a long middle state, scarred, aging, but still functional. They communicated their condition honestly. This difference reflects a deeper psychological divide. Medieval builders assumed they would not be there to oversee their work forever. Buildings had to stand without constant supervision. Windows had to survive neglect, forgotten maintenance, and centuries of changing conditions. Modern systems assume the opposite. They rely on inspections, monitoring and scheduled replacement. Remove those supports, and failure follows quickly. Windows sit at the boundary between safety and exposure. They experience every change first: temperature swings, pressure shifts, weather, and impact. Medieval builders respected that boundary. They designed windows as filters, not barriers. Change passed through them slowly. Modern systems pretend that boundary can be erased entirely, that interior and exterior can be made equivalent through technology alone. Time always disproves that belief. Materials age, environments change, control fades. Medieval windows endured because they accepted these truths instead of denying them. They did not resist aging, they managed it. And yet even systems that age well can be undone by a single modern mistake, because when endurance is replaced with convenience, resilience disappears. The final warning emerges when we examine the moment modern design made its trade. At some point, endurance stopped being the goal. Modern design began to value speed, openness, and visual impact over survival under stress. Glass became larger, thinner, and more exposed, not because it performed better over time, but because it looked modern and could be installed quickly. Convenience replaced restraint, efficiency replaced caution, and buildings became products rather than shelters. Medieval builders never confused appearance with performance. They understood that what looked impressive on the first day meant nothing if it failed on the worst day. Modern systems reverse that priority. A glass facade that photographs well is celebrated, even if it depends entirely on constant energy, perfect weather seals, and uninterrupted maintenance to remain functional. The moment those supports weaken, the design collapses under its own assumptions. This trade has real consequences. As climates grow harsher, glass towers shatter under storms they were never meant to face. Heat floods interiors during power failures, turning homes and offices into traps rather than refuges. Cold penetrates instantly when systems shut down. These failures are not rare anomalies, they are predictable outcomes of designs that assume control will always exist. Medieval windows did not eliminate risk, they managed it honestly. Builders assumed neglect, disruption, and time would arrive. And they were right. Wars came, plagues passed through cities, roofs collapsed and were rebuilt. Yet many windows remained, damaged but functional, because they were never pushed beyond what their materials could endure. Modern design assumes the opposite. It treats disruption as temporary and rare. It assumes replacement is easy, materials are infinite, and systems will always be repaired on schedule. History suggests otherwise. When those assumptions fail, modern buildings reveal how little margin they truly have. This is not nostalgia, it is a warning. The shift from endurance to convenience did not make buildings stronger, it made them dependent, and dependency is fragile by nature. The final lesson does not ask us to rebuild the past, it asks us to listen to it, because the windows that survive centuries still have something to teach. The lesson of medieval windows is not a call to rebuild castles or live in dim rooms lit by narrow slits of glass. It is a reminder of how differently the past understood reality. These windows survived not because medieval builders were lucky, but because they were honest. They accepted that the world was unstable, that materials had limits, and that time would always win if it was challenged directly. So they designed systems that cooperated with those forces instead of denying them. Modern glass architecture rejects that humility. It aims for flawless surfaces and uninterrupted views, assuming technology will compensate for every weakness. When systems work, the result feels impressive. When they fail, the failure is sudden and absolute. Interiors overheat or freeze. Buildings become unsafe. Replacement becomes urgent. The structure reveals how little resilience was built into it from the start. Medieval windows offer a different definition of success. They did not need constant attention. They did not depend on precise conditions. They did not collapse when neglected. They survived because they were designed as part of a larger system. Stone, lead, glass, and shadow, working together, each material doing only what it could do well. Nothing was overstressed. Nothing was asked to perform beyond its nature. This mindset extends far beyond windows. It applies to how shelter is built, how food is stored, how heat is managed, and how communities survive disruption. Medieval systems assumed failure would happen and planned for it. Modern systems assume failure can be postponed indefinitely. The difference between glass that endures centuries and glass that shatters in minutes is not technology, it is respect for reality. Until modern design relearns that restraint, medieval windows will continue to outlast us, quietly embedded in stone, proving that endurance is not about progress, but about understanding what cannot be controlled.